Welcome back to the School of Whispers podcast. This week on the show, I share one of the most life-changing experiences of my life so far. A month ago from today, I left my home and I went on a week-long Iboga retreat, which was facilitated, hosted, run by the company Root and Wisdom, which was founded by my friends Troy and Joe, as well as a nonprofit No Fallen Hero. So within this week-long retreat, there was meditation, yoga, a spiritual bath, so many things, but the real kickers were 2 Iboga ceremonies. I say this in a very loving way, but nothing has fucked up my life more than Iboga has. And I'm so very grateful. Highlights from this episode. I share about what I learned within the first Iboga ceremony of this retreat, which had a lot to do with calling in my greatest fears and learning about addictions to suffering ultimately, but to feeling inadequate and feeling weak, and all of the above just falls under this umbrella of suffering. I share about the space in between where I just felt deeply uncomfortable and just wanted to feel settled and not knowing how to get there. And then I get into my second ceremony at this retreat where I learned so many valuable lessons that quite honestly broke my brain from what it used to be and enabled me to rewire myself to a place where I can observe and love and find presence. It's I guess it's everything anyone could ever want. And since I've come home from this retreat, I really willingly blown up my life, and I'm observing it and I'm loving it. And so I'll give you all the details within this episode. Thank you for being here, and let's get right into it. Welcome to the School of Whispers podcast. This is your host, Stephanie. I'm a licensed acupuncture physician and herbalist with a background in psychology, health sciences, and exercise physiology. Within my own spiritual awakening, I found myself learning pivotal lessons when I got myself to be in silence. Within that silence, the whispers came through. This is my sacred space of vulnerable storytelling where my guests and I share about the magic that comes from a life of following these whispers. I'm grateful you made it here, and I hope this show inspires you to live a life of following your own whispers. Let's get into the show. Hello. This is your most loyal podcaster reporting for duty to report everything that's transpired over what feels like a lifetime, but has in fact been, it's been almost a month. A month can be a lifetime. I think a whole lifetime can happen in a week, and that's exactly what happened to me when I went away for my week-long Iboga retreat. Where to begin? Let me think. Well, to give you guys a little bit of a recap, if you didn't listen to the episode 2 weeks ago, but the episode before that, The Whispers of Admitting You Were Powerless, I was in a state of deep suffering and spiraling and all the things. And so I really knew that I had a lot of work cut out for me on this week-long women's retreat. And, to keep it short and sweet for a moment, I got everything I asked for and then some. So So to give you a little bit of a lay of the land, this retreat was run by my friend, my two good friends, their company, Root and Wisdom. You've heard them both on the show, Troy and Joe. And they hosted the retreat in collaboration with a nonprofit called No Fallen Hero, which is for veterans, first responders, as well as the children and families of veterans and first responders. And so we stayed on an undisclosed piece of land that was like an oasis within the desert, and the land was sacred native land, and you could really feel it. You just felt so held. And so we had a house with shared rooms, and there was like an outdoor kitchen space area, a fire pit, there was a yoga shala, and then on the property itself there was a farm with animals, there were multiple family homes, and there was a river / stream, like a thin, for a river it was on the thinner side and not very big and rushing. It was more of a gentle stream, but it was bigger than a stream, you know what I mean? And they had hammocks, and it was just a really, really lovely, special place. And so I arrived there on Friday, and we had all of Saturday to just exist. And I really felt myself come back to myself in that day. I had, just been in so much pain and suffering and turmoil before going, that I'd lost that little piece of spark of Stephanie. I just had no energy. I had this thing going on with my scalp too, which it's an interesting point to make that I will touch on later, but just to kind of give you an idea, I looked pale. I looked like I hadn't slept in a while, and I had so my dad has psoriasis, and so my sister and I are kind of like predisposed to having psoriasis, and when it manifests, it usually manifests on my scalp, kind of at my hairline. And in the month or so leading up to this retreat, usually I can keep it under control, but it was just uncontrollable, and it was growing from my scalp down my forehead, and it was just red and dry and scaly and angry and honestly embarrassing, because I would just have like flakes in my hair, and I would put balms on it, and I felt like everyone could see it, and it sucked. So that's kind of how I came into this retreat. And to fast forward to Sunday night, our first night of ceremony. So for those of you who are not familiar with Iboga, I feel like it's been mentioned in almost every solo episode. Yeah, almost every one of this season 3, as well as in my podcasts with Troy and Joe, which I will link in the show notes. I will do my best to give it the description and honor it deserves in a summarized manner. But Iboga is a root that is from a place in Central Africa called Gabon, and the keepers of this root medicine are it's a big tree of a bunch of tribes that are under this culture called the Buiti culture. And so I know that the Bugongo are one of the tribes, and there's others, and they've really they live in just like a constant honor of tradition, and the Buiti people, from what I understand, has developed through the wisdom of this root Iboga. So Iboga as a plant medicine, it's a hunter of the truth, and it really gets down to the root. While ayahuasca, in my experience, is kind of, it's a vine. So, and vines like to interconnect things, and, it wraps around trees and suffocates the tree out and goes from tree to tree, and it's constantly moving and intertwining and connecting. And that, I think, is a very great way to explain the nature of ayahuasca, at least in my mind, how it worked. It connected me to other realms, and it was a very like inside out kind of plant medicine, whereas Iboga is like an outside in. It's a root. It gets deep, deep into the psyche. And so what it has done for me, I struggle to say like what it does, because I don't know. I mean, I got actually the incredible pleasure and privilege of hearing about 5 other women who they all had sat with Iboga for the first time. So we all had 2 ceremonies. So this was my second and third time sitting with Iboga. And I was so excited to hear, because we were all so different in careers and temperament, in our walks of life, where we come from, all over the States. And it was really, I knew it was going to be a really special experience to hear the differences. But in my experience, what Iboga does is it magnifies my psyche. Every thought, and I would say that it would do that for a lot of other people, especially in the beginning. What it seems to do is have this property of just magnifying the thoughts that I've had and emotions that I haven't wanted to feel and I've wanted to run away from, or just like certain pains in my body that I just go throughout my day. I'm like, no, not now. I'll address that later. But do I ever want to really address it? No, because it's very uncomfortable to do that. So my first Iboga experience, if you're just new to the show, it was just like mind purge. My mind just dumped a bunch of obsessive thoughts. I also had a really great psychospiritual journey within my body. I saw things from my childhood. I got to understand certain pieces of me, insecurities, and move towards more, self-love and confidence. It was a really wonderful, silly time. I remember in my first ceremony, I got to see the buiti. Like I watched them enter the room, because another thing that's really special about Iboga is it just magnifies all your senses as well. I would say, to use a Chinese medicine term, it opens the orifices. So all our orifices are our sense of smell, our sight, and our ability to listen and feel. I would put our pores and our somatosensory system as a part of the orifices, because it's just like taking the world in. And so it just magnifies it all. One could say that you hallucinate, but are you really hallucinating, or is it just like another dimension that's there all the time, but your senses are so magnified that you're open to it? And why I say that is because traditionally amongst the Buti people is to communicate with the ancestors. And they've been using this for generation upon generation upon generation to gain ancestral wisdom and just universal wisdom. So, Dipoti Iboga, which means thank you, Iboga, because, man, that's Troy explained to me, that's why they called their company Root and Wisdom, because this root provides a deep wisdom that, well, I guess you guys will find out. Okay, so before my ceremony with Troy, we had a little meeting, and I told him that I am just consumed by fear, absolutely consumed, and the future and what the future could hold. And I really wanted to connect with my version of God, because I was in Al-Anon going through the first couple of steps, which are admitting you are powerless over, I'm going to say admitting you are powerless. And I would say, let's rewrite the story here a bit as I reflect, especially after my second ceremony. I realized that a great way for me to reframe the first step is, you are only powerful over your own thoughts, feelings, emotions, and beliefs. That's the only thing that you are powerful over. And acknowledging your power of that makes you more powerful than you could ever imagine in this world. It unlocks so much, because I've been listening to a lot of Ram Dass lately, and something he says is, our mind is our karma. So I used to think that this world is all about polarities. And in a lot of ways, especially this dimension, it is very much about, polarities and boundaries and physical forms and life and death and all that stuff. But I'm starting to realize that it doesn't have to be that way. This world could actually be completely neutral. And for example, life could be seen as the opposite of death, and so on and so forth. Or what if we could see life and death as the same thing, which is a new beginning, a new door to walk through? And so on and so forth. And so with karma, I absolutely believe in karma. And a friend of mine, he doesn't believe in karma, because he was like, look at all these kids with cancer. Like, you're gonna tell me that these kids deserve it? And that's your human mind putting an added meaning to karma, that we all kind of are like, oh, well, karma's a bitch. Like, what goes around comes around. Like, yeah, karma can be a bitch, and it's true. What goes around comes around. But karma is not meant to be a vehicle for punishment and self-righteousness, or righteousness, period. It can bring justice, but like, not always. I mean, again, I think justice is a construct of the human mind. So what is karma? Karma is it's like, if you're familiar with Taoism, it's the Tao, it's the way of the world. And the way of the world is to seek balance. The way of all things in life is to maintain this flow of yin and yang, darkness and light, and neither is better or worse than the other. They just are. And that's what the Tao is. The way of life is just, it is. Somebody asked in a talk I was listening to with Ram Dass, they asked him to touch on the language of being. And he said, well, that term, the language of being, completely negates what beingness is, because language is not being, it's doing. It's a gappa gappa. it's again another human construct to explain and convey things. But beingness is just beingness. And I want to leave it at that, because there's a lot I could say about it. But I want to go back to real quick before I get into my Iboga journey on why our mind is our karma. So the mind that we have, with all its neuroticisms and its personalities and its beliefs, it's completely, entirely created to bring our soul in and out of experiences that help us learn and help us return to a level of balance in the world to fulfill certain karmas. But here's the thing. We identify way too strongly with our belief systems and our personalities, and we're encouraged to, but we are not our minds, and we are not our bodies either, which is, man, it's super trippy to get into this, but I guess here we go. We're a soul. And again, this is my world view. You don't really have to ascribe to it, but it really helps me understand why certain things happen, and to really embrace everything that does happen in the world and in my life. And, when things get hard, you can choose to see it as I'm being punished. But again, that's the mind making up ideas. I heard somebody said this recently, I think it was in an interview, but they said that the mind is a terrible master and a wonderful servant. So if we could teach our mind to serve us, then we could actually transcend this unconscious running into karmic walls again and again and again. I mean, I think that there's some karmas that like, like when you gotta do something and say something and you just have zero control over yourself sometimes, and you look back, you're like, oh my God, why did I do that? I was not in my head. I was out of my body. I'm starting to understand that those moments are karmic moments. But anyways, I digress. Okay. So, yes. So I told Troy that I wanted to get through the first 3 steps of Al-Anon, which again, the powerlessness. The second is understanding that there is a higher power that we can turn our lives over to. And the third step is turning our lives over to that higher power. And so growing up Catholic and having, a lot of people all around me tell me what they think God is and in spirituality. And I touch on this in the last episode, but I kind of, in my return in my 20s to my spirituality, I didn't really include God, creator, whatever within it. I was more comfortable with the concept of source, but now I'm realizing I think source is a little bit different from God, but not really. And like, again, human construct and label. But all these versions of God, like I remember saying to Troy, like looking out in the clouds, putting a hand up and be like, God, turning my life to the God. And Troy like put his hand to his heart and he was like, I think that what you're looking for is remembering that God is within you, is finding the God that's within you. And he said, he gave me a suggestion for that night's ceremony. He said, call in your greatest fears and look them dead in the center, dead in the center, dead in the center. And as you move through it, you're going to move towards the light and you're going to eventually get down to the bottom of it, the truth, and find the God within. So I was like, okay, call in my greatest fears, got it, God within, got it. And it's funny looking back, usually when I go to plant medicine ceremonies, especially ayahuasca ceremonies, or really any big psychedelic, I'm very specific about my intention. And when I hear people, man, I remember one time hearing somebody have a similar intention of calling in my greatest fears so that I can release them, and thinking, damn, you poor thing, I feel so sorry for you. You're going to have a rough night. I would never do that. And now here I was with that as my intention. So before getting to the journey itself, one thing that we always do before going in is Troy uses this very specific herbal stick thing that he lights on fire, and he moves it around, and you stand still and you watch the light. And the reminder here is to always follow the light within ceremony. And that was something that really has stayed with me all the way through. So we take the Iboga, we're all sitting by the fire, we do all of our blessings, and then we just chat. And then when you're starting to feel the effects of the dose, you raise your hand and somebody walks you. We had our ceremony set up in this really beautiful yogashala. Man, it was epic. And it's funny, I always get this feeling, and I don't know if it's because I'm a twin, and in within the tribes, the keepers of Iboga, they worship twins and mothers of twins, but I always just I feel like a queen. I feel like a queen when I have Iboga in my system, and I'm really starting to feel the effects. I feel like a drunk queen, but yeah, nonetheless. And I remember getting into the room and seeing my mat kind of right dead in the center, right there waiting for me. And I just felt like, oh, this is my throne, and I'm going to lay down and wear my eye mask and be a queen for the evening. And so, without revealing a lot of details, because quite honestly, there's a lot going on in my personal life that's really up in the air, and I'm not really in a space yet to give details and all that stuff. And I really want to focus this podcast on the experience and the wisdom, the root and the wisdom. So anyways, as I lay down, it's really interesting as you feel the Iboga interact with your body and your system. You feel like individual muscles wiggle and release. And what it does is it opens up your pineal gland, which is a whole other way of seeing. So you wear an eye mask, but you can see the room. To give you an example of how strong your ability to see and perceive light is, so I'm laying on my mat. This is my second ceremony, but I was laying on my side, and I was looking out. I wasn't looking out the door. I was facing the door, and maybe like, I don't know, 200 feet away. Is that a lot of feet? I don't know. I would say like a quarter of a mile away. There's up on a hill-ish. There's a house. Not even a quarter mile, maybe a quarter mile. It's a house, and it had a light on. And I remember having my eye mask on and thinking, ugh, I wish that house would turn off their light because it's bothering my eyes. And then I had the realization of, oh shit, I'm wearing an eye mask through a door, all this ways away, this house up on a hill, there's a light on that's bothering me. So just to give you an idea, and for me at least, I can see all these like people like coming down to sit next to me, and the room there's just so much going on, and you can get a lot of cartoons and visuals. I didn't get as many cartoonish things my second time. I would say with my second ceremony, it was a lot less chaotic with the visuals. I felt like I was actually, rather than just a complete dump, I was able to veer myself in a certain direction. And I remember when Troy checked in on me and I told him that, he goes, yeah, the second ceremony is a lot less chaotic. So I begin by calling in my greatest fears. And, I saw some things and they weren't that scary. I was like, yeah, that's kind of scary, but I wouldn't say that's my greatest fear. And then I got to a point where I saw my life, the life I was living before I went on this retreat, and it destroyed me. And I was like, oh fuck, that's my greatest fear. I was living in my greatest fear. And so the tears came, everything came, and I flowed and I moved through it, and I eventually got to a really great flow of just moving through it, feeling it just like explode and settle within my body, explode and settle up and down like a wave. And here's a funny little anecdote. So then I got to a point where I was allowing just any thought that could induce fear in my body to come through. And I had a thought of, taking a fifth spoon. I had taken twice as much Iboga as I had taken the first time. And Troy told me, I think the next day or the day before or after, that it was a flood dose, which is a big dose. So, as he would say, it's a lot of wood. And I thought about a fifth spoon, and I was like, no, that's terrifying. Kind of like ayahuasca. If anyone's familiar with the whole ayahuasca situation of being called up to take a second cup, the internal battle of, do I take another? I don't know. And so it was kind of like that with the fifth spoon. And so I told myself, okay, sit with it. maybe give it some time. What is time when you're in this space? I don't know, but I told myself I'd give myself time. And as I conjured the thought, there was less fear every time, but there was still a little trickle left. So then I raised my hand and I tell Troy that I want another spoon. And he goes, why? And it's hard to really keep, it's hard for me to keep very linear, especially with speaking in Iboga, especially in the very beginning, as I'm getting used to the lay of the land. And I'm thinking, fuck, I have to explain myself. And so I walked him through my thought process, and I said, maybe if I face the fear, become the fear, then, I'll go deeper into the journey. And he was like, Steph, you're already like very deep in it, and it actually will just prolong the experience. So you really don't need it. And he goes, if you want, there's this great place in Africa called Gabon, where you just get spoon after spoon after spoon. If you want to do it that way, we can make sure we get you to Gabon, but that's not how I serve. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I get super nauseous and pick up my bucket and threw up. And he goes, fifth spoon, huh? And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna lay down. But yeah, basically, within that ceremony, I had this deep rooted fear of a realization come in that completely shattered the reality that I've held in my life for the past 7 or so years. And with that shattering, my whole future and all my beliefs about it and all beliefs about myself and my life shattered and crumbled down. And I'm still like liquid. I'm not really, I haven't rebuilt that structure of what I think my future is and will be. And I'll get to that in a little bit. But another thing that happened during that ceremony is somehow, so Troy came over to help me with a psychospiritual journey within my body. And somehow we got on the topic of how important it is for me to make sure that everyone else around me feels good and okay and safe and content. And I said to him, and he said, how important is that to you? I'm like, oh, I rely on it. And he goes, well, relying on something is an addiction. And when he said that, and then he said a couple of other things, it just opened me up to seeing how I live my life completely addicted to controlling how other people feel, or thinking that I'm in control of how other people feel. And I remember Troy saying, it's impossible to be in control of that. And so, while this is like, I guess, a selfless addiction, you're keeping yourself in constant suffering because people are gonna feel and go through their own thing. And who am I? He's like, do you think you're a stronger force than karma itself? And I said, no. He goes, then how could you control how they feel? And I saw how I was addicted to feeling inadequate within that. I was addicted to suffering, and I'll get to that in a moment. But in feeling that, like, oh, I'm not enoughness, like that inadequacy, of course I would never be able to make sure everyone around me was okay. And because I wouldn't be able to ever get to that space, then I would always feel not enough. And that was an addiction for me. And then at one point we got to my right hip, and we're like dismantling, and I could feel things changing. It's crazy when you feel like beliefs and things pulling off, or you just dismantling them. There's such a somatic response in the body as you do it. And I'll leave that there, how a belief can create a somatic response. But in my right hip, it felt like we were towards the end of it, and I said, but we couldn't get past it, and I was feeling doubt and all this stuff. And then I said to Troy, like, this sounds kind of crazy, but a part of me doesn't want to release the pain and the beliefs that are there. And he goes, why? And I thought about it and I was like, because I get off on the suffering, because it's been my excuse to rest when my body wants to rest. I rely on it, the suffering and the pain, to get into other states of being and consciousness. And that's when I really, really got to the bottom of realizing how addicted I was to suffering. And I realized that I've always had this doubt that I would get better. But in fact, doubt was just a symptom on the surface. What truly was there was an addiction to not being okay, to constant suffering. And it was just for the rest of the night, after one point Troy was like, okay, I'm going to leave you to it. And for the rest of the night, for hours and hours and hours, I continued to dismantle just all these beliefs around suffering, all this fear, standing up every time I was faced with a fearful idea or belief or whatever it may be, or a sensation. I felt myself like straighten my spine. And it was really interesting because when Troy would say things that I didn't want to hear but that were true, for example, at one point I was thinking, oh my God, what if I changed too much and maybe I should just pretend none of this ever happened and just go home and go back to my old life. And within that process, I realized that all this dry scaliness at my scalp was distrust in myself. And I saw myself covered. Like if I going back within following this thought trail and fulfilling it, I saw myself covered in the psoriasis all over my body. And in that moment in my body, I felt like somebody was my body, like my head was one way to the left and my body was twisting to the right. It felt like my head and body weren't connected. And as I breathed and I started to dismantle the emotions and go through the beliefs, or go through the emotions and dismantle the beliefs, my body and my body and my head started to align and feel like a straight arrow. It was such a fascinating sensation. But yeah, that was basically my whole night. And the next day, I did not sleep at all. My first ceremony, I slept. This time I did not sleep, probably until around 11 or 12 the next day. And it really is a beautiful gift of that comes with Ibogas, is a still and silent mind. But for me, it was, but it wasn't. I had to go through this because it was going to be 1, 2, 3 whole day, 2.5 days until the next ceremony. And I had my work cut out for me. I realized that true love, capital love, love, is a love that's without attachment. And when detachment gets into the situation, it's something other than love. It becomes attachment, fear, possessiveness. It becomes other emotions, and it muddles the purity of it. And so I remember that day and the next, in tears, because I knew my true nature was to love without attachment. And so I had to go through all of the attachment in my life and detach from my kitties, from my family, from everyone in my life, and continue to love, but to let go. And I'm still doing that. I'm still having this awareness of it. I'm still just unrooting, like digging up. I feel I have this image of it's like it's spring and I'm going through the garden and I'm digging up any roots that were left behind that I had left over from the last harvest, and just realizing. And I think honestly that has been the most intensively emotional experience so far post Iboga is going continuously through this attachment that I've had to all the things in my life that I, labeled as love. And it is, in a way, there's still love there. But again, I'm unlearning how to love in that way. So after that point, I probably within the course of like 48 hours probably slept maybe like 8 to 10 hours, which is not too bad. But didn't really sleep much, just continued to dismantle and feel my body do like a little as I dismantled. And I remember on the day of ceremony, I said, or was it, I don't know, what is time, right? But I said at one point, I feel like there's a scaffold in my body, in my torso, and it's just rags, streaming rags, and it's just the last little pieces of it. And I feel so unsettled and so deeply uncomfortable, and I want to get rid of it. How do I get rid of it? And Troy said, Steph, you're not going to get rid of it. That's your lower self. We all will always have a lower self, an ego. And, what if you he said something along the lines of, because I said, I just want to feel settled. And he said, but you're probably never going to be settled because that's not life. Life is not about feeling settled. And you're going to be doing all these things in your life, and you're going to have all these changes all the time. So how about instead of resisting the lower self, resisting the feeling of settled or feeling unsettled, you embrace it and you accept it. And since then, I had a conversation with a friend, and she gave this great analogy where she heard a speaker talk about the heart monitor, how it's doo-doo, doo-doo. When you see a heartbeat, it's an up and a down. And when someone dies, that's flatline. So when you're settled, when you're flatline, that's because you went back into the cosmic juice bowl, punch bowl. And it's a great place to be, I'm sure. But that's not what this incarnation's gonna be about. And so when he said that, I thought, oh, I see where my next ceremony is going to go. And so my intention for the next ceremony was to learn how to embrace the unsettled, how to observe. And in that day, gosh, we did so much in that day. We had a meditation in the morning, and then that afternoon we had a special ceremony of a spiritual bath. Or no, gosh, we did so much over the 2 days, I guess, because it really just felt like one long day. And we had a meditation where Troy, he did this, we talked about this concept of like, how do you know you have hands? And I'm not going to really get into it for the sake of time, but it was basically a way of connecting to the oneness, the allness, with the space in between that connects all things. And we also talked about a concept of your mind is made to perceive and to judge and take stock of the world. Your mind is the judge. And Troy said that, when people come and they're like, yeah, I want to get rid of all judgment, he's like, well, good luck, because that's what the mind does. But if we can learn to not judge the judge, so the mind thinks the thought, and instead of being like, that's fucked up, man, I must be a fucked up person, we go, that's a thought. That was an interesting thought. Or as Ram Dass likes to say, there's thirst. There's fear. And it's more of an interest, a fascination. So in my that second ceremony within that retreat, my third ever, I only needed 2 spoons. We were going to have a tea that night, and I could not do it. I was already just in the zone and needed to go lay down. And it was really interesting. My mind was so still it was there, but it was slower, and I was in control until I wasn't. And I'll get to that in a moment. And the visuals were, rather than just random cartoons and people coming to sit by me, it was these beautiful worlds. And I would just manipulate them in certain ways of like, oh, I want the water to ripple in this way, or I think it would be cool if the sky looked pink, or whatever it may be. It reminded me of I'm blanking on the Avatar world, not the Last Airbender, which was my first ever Iboga ceremony, but Avatar, the James Cameron one. What's the name of that plant? Whatever, it doesn't matter. But it looked everything, eyes open, eyes closed, even going to the bathroom with my eyes open, just looked like that. It was gorgeous. And when Troy came to walk me through a psycho-spiritual journey, I was just in such a zone of creating these worlds and observing my thoughts. A creation and an observation and letting go. I was in such a meditative state that I just was like, I'm going to stay here. And he was like, oh, and he said at one point, he's like, this is like the ultimate meditation here. And it really was. I had no control over my mind. I just let it run. And I just watched it. And when I came across a thought that kind of had created that, it was less intense that night, but this sensation of my head one way and my body the other, I pulled it towards me, and I stayed with it, and I just invited in every other thought and belief around it, and just dismantled it bit by bit. And honestly, I don't really even remember what those beliefs were. They're just kind of gone. And I remember just my mantra being, I am observing. And then I got to this one point. This is a sweet little anecdote that I'd love to share. I wrote a song kind of around it, but at one point I went to the moon, because that's something that you do with an Iboga, which later on I was like, I don't really need to go to the moon. It's all right here. All the answers right here, which gets me to a whole point that was huge within my first, which I guess it's relevant here, so I'll get there, which within that first ceremony on the retreat was, I got to the truth, guys. I got to the God within, and it's right within my heart. I think of the Paulo Coelho book, The Alchemist. There was a quote where, and man, I've talked about this quite a few times, but this quote is, the boy asks this magi, like, why should I follow my heart? And the magi says, because it will never shut up. Basically, paraphrasing the quote here. It'll never stop. It'll never stop telling you what it thinks about life and about the world. It'll never stop. The voice of your heart. So, I mean, you don't have to follow it, but when you do, you really get to this beautiful connection with all that there is, and that's God. Like that's the God within. And I remember when I said that to Troy, he's like, good. And I was like, I have to go to the bathroom. He goes, okay, go kiss yourself in the mirror and say, I love you and I trust you, and you're the God within. And he said, if you continuously just follow the God within, follow your heart, follow your truth, you'll never ever go wrong, and you'll always follow the truth. So there's that. And then so as I, within that second ceremony, go to the moon, I asked the moon of like, I remembered the moon saying, go back to the stars. So I'm back in the stars, and I just feel like this familiarity, this vibrating love in my chest. And it was like this whirling, glowing orb of light within my chest matched all these whirling, glowing orbs of light all around me amongst the stars. And I heard this voice say, this is so cute. This voice was like, you're a star heart. Like, you came to this earth with the stars in your heart. You came here to be selfless and to be of service to people, and everyone else in this world who's here with a similar purpose, they have a star heart. And they said, this voice said, that's why, because my whole life when the sun goes down, I always get like a little melancholiness inside of me. And they go, that's not, you don't get sad because the sun's going down. You get sad because the stars come out. And that's why I don't really go out at night, because I don't really ever like go outside at night, because you see the stars in the sky and a little part of you misses home. A little subconscious part of you just like, oh, that's my family there. And I'll be there. I'll be back. But I thought it was just so cute, because it was just like seeing all these people in my life, and it was just like, star heart, she's a star heart, they're a star heart. So super cute little moment. So another really fascinating moment that I want to share, where I got a cool like piece of information, was with whatever that energy that is going to the moon. I just kind of like stayed where I was, but I asked, maybe it was my heart, maybe it was the God within, I don't know, maybe it was the Buiti. Who knows? But I asked, what is chi and blood? If you're not really familiar with the program here, I am a student and physician of Chinese medicine, a forever student, and I'm really fascinated, as many of us in this profession are, with the concept of chi and blood. So I asked, what is chi and blood truly? And I got this answer of, well, first they asked me, well, where does blood come from? And I go, well, from the heart, right? Like that. I mean, where does blood get distributed throughout the whole body? And I was like, okay, well, we get their blood from our food, and then that's our gu qi, and then that qi goes up to the heart to create blood to be pumped through our whole body. And they're like, and what is blood to qi? Blood is the mother of qi. That's another thing we say in Chinese medicine. So qi is life force energy, and blood is basically where blood goes, qi will follow. And I like to see it as blood is the physical substance of life and creation that we can see and we can feel flowing through our veins, and it carries the spark within every single one of our cells and nutrients and all of that stuff. That is qi, that is life force. And so I just saw the electrical circuit of the heart, and I was thinking, where is that electrical circuit from? And then lo and behold, it brings me right back to that little star energy. And and you know, who knows? Who truly knows? Nobody knows. And that's why I think I love this medicine, because there's so much philosophy to it that's open to interpretation. But for me, I realized, oh, that electrical current comes from that little piece of the cosmos, of the stars, that's right in my heart. And I was like, fuck. Chi and blood comes from the God within. And man, that's a whole other tangent I would love to get on one day. I'm gonna fairly soon here do a whole podcast on chi and blood, and all the principles of chi. So stay tuned for that. But to get back to the very last pieces of ceremony that have absolutely, completely changed my life. As I continued to just learn and observe and dismantle, I had that mantra, I'm observing it. And then I had this thought of, I would love to see my soul. I would love to see what my soul looks like. And I was, expecting to see this cool, maybe like avatar looking thing, or this, I don't know, some anime badass looking thing. And instead I was given this image of of all these landscapes, except I could barely see the landscapes. All I could see was the empty, static space. I remember feeling the breeze on my skin, and I realized, oh, that's what my soul is. It's not this form. It's formless. It's the empty space that connects all things that we had spoken about the day before. And every time now I feel the breeze, I'm reminded of that true nature that we all are. We are all like this interconnected space between. And that might be a little too woo-woo esoteric. And there's a lot I could say about it, but I'm going to leave it at that. And I remember really reaching this state of like, oh, I'm loving every single moment. I am loving every single thought and emotion. And so my mantra changed from I'm observing it to I'm observing it and I'm loving it. I am observing it and I'm loving it. And especially towards the end of that ceremony, my mind went to a dark place. I went to a place in the future where I could experience a lot of suffering. And I experienced all of those emotions. And throughout the whole entire experience, I observed it and I loved it. And so coming out of that ceremony, I think we had like 3 days left in the retreat. It really just, I just felt myself start to shift and shift. And I also felt my old self kind of scrambling and be like, fuck, don't leave me behind, but think about all the things that we love and all the people we love. And I can safely say that Halloween, that Halloween was the scariest Halloween of my life. So much fear. And I moved from this higher state to the lower state very quickly and fell into turmoil and suffering, thinking about the future of what was to come. And I think there's 2 lessons in that. I think the first one is that's the flow of life sometimes. I think suffering is completely voluntary, but the highs and the lows, the high vibe, the low vibe, yeah, I used to think that was me doing something wrong when it was all really perfect. And even the suffering was really perfect because, I'm living life with this constant lens of karma, and doing that in itself, it snaps me right out of it. But just being able to appreciate every high and low for the mere purpose of a transfer of energy or a lesson, that's lesson number 1 in that, is that it's all good, it's all perfect, and it's all a lesson for me. And I think the other one is when you exist in the future, when I exist in the future becomes a very overwhelming and scary place. And long story short, my life is completely different. I remember at one point somebody said to me like, oh, you don't have your future that you thought you had. That's so sad. And I was like, none of us have the future that we thought we had. We can plan all we want, and if it comes to fruition, great. But if it doesn't, duh, who are we to know what the future is? And so I've been given this gift of being hyper focused in the present, of being here now in every moment. And that being said, I've had 29 years of my life I'm in my 29th year, so I guess 28 and a half years of my life being in the future and in the past, and rarely as much in the present. And of course, finding moments of presence, and in those moments, woof, how beautiful life became. And then when I was pulled out of it is, oh, how difficult and scary and terrifying life could be. But that's all in my mind. What I think my future is gonna be what it's gonna be. And my mind, it's gonna make up all these ideas, but that's just what it does. And so it's been really fun to just relearn and reobserve the world while being able to understand simple things about life, but in a new way of depth where the mind doesn't get in the way. Like, for example, my tea, before my ceremony, I had one of those, I think it's yogi tea that has the little tea bag paper thing at the end. They have little quotes, And my quote before my first ceremony was, it was something about the heart and the eyes. And I'm paraphrasing, I'm using it in my own words of, one heart sees better than two eyes. I totally live my life right now completely wrapped up in that idea. And what I said earlier, I'm in this liquid state. I feel like I'm in a chrysalis, the caterpillar before becoming the butterfly, and I'm just completely liquid. Like, I really haven't rebuilt my structures of like what my future is going to be, who I am, what I believe in. It's every time it comes up, I go back to that ceremony of observing and loving it and dismantling it. And I'm starting to wonder, do I become the butterfly in this life? Or is that like when I die, I become the butterfly? Like, do I just remain liquid in everything? I don't know. But, all that being said, I think that life is going to continue on. And this is something that I've realized, that I'm going to have feelings. I'm going to have thoughts. I'm going to have things come in. And that doesn't take away from this new place and this wisdom that I've gained. That's a part of it. And all I need to do is observe it and appreciate it. Like, somebody asked Ram Dass in one of his talks, they asked him, how to reach a place of self-love. And he goes, appreciate, self-appreciation. And so when I get period cramps, I appreciate it. I observe it. I'm like, wow, that's a lot. That's fucking a lot. And I gotta admit, getting my period this weekend, my mind and my body were like, bring us back to comfort, bring us back to safety, bring us back to everything we know. And then, my response is, but none of that really exists. And then, which created more turmoil and like just tears, and nothing could stop the tears and the grief of letting that go. And I observed it, and it took me a while to love it. But it took me like 2 days, and I observe it and I love it. Somebody asked me what is it like being back in the real world, being around maybe not the most conscious of people, just the hum of quote unquote normal life. If anyone's ever done a plant medicine, I know, like, personally, after doing ayahuasca, man, it was tough. It was tough going back to the world and going back to quote unquote unconscious people. And my response to that question was, I observe them and I love them. It's really that simple. It really is. And I know that the road to getting there isn't always that simple. But, you could just do a bunch of Iboga. No, I hesitate to say that because it's really not for everyone. And I meant to give this in the beginning of my talk, but I didn't. So here I am now. Maybe I'll include it in the intro. So you get 2 caveats here. Iboga is not for everyone. And I'm not telling you that I think you should do it. And I'm not telling you that if you do it, you will get this result. My life has been very unique to me and niche to me. And everything that I've done up to this point has helped me get here. But man, it's a great tool for it. It really is a wonderful tool, especially if you're with the right providers. So I will only ever suggest Troy and Joe, Root and Wisdom, as providers, because that's the only people I've ever sat with, and probably, other than like going to Gabon and Africa, ever will sit with. And on a side note, saw myself in Africa. I'm going to go to that place where they give me spoon after spoon after spoon. And I'm really looking forward to it. When that's happening, that's in the future. So I don't know, but I want to thank you for being here, for listening. I want to thank Iboga and Troy and Nicole and Clarice and the women who held space, the keepers of the land, all the perfect women that I sat with. I want to thank me, Steffi, for being here in this life, experiencing what I'm experiencing. Because wow, it's a lot of really perfect experiences. And, there's a lot more I could say. There is so much more I could say, but I'm gonna leave it there for now. This feels very complete. So if you enjoyed this episode and you want to show your support, the best thing you could do is leave me a review or a rating on whatever platform you're on. If you're on YouTube, like and subscribe. If you're on all the other whatever things, subscribe so you don't miss an episode every 2 weeks from here on out till the end of the year. And yeah, I'm not really sure how much longer this season will go, but man, I've got a lot of incredible interviews with incredible humans coming up here. So stay tuned for that. And I'm sending you so much love, so much love. And I'm observing you. I'm watching you. Okay. Goodbye. Love you.